Assalamu alaikum. This is Halima, and welcome to Oraan Podcast. Oraan Podcast is a platform that we've created to talk about hard conversations around money. And today we have Anusheh Ashraf, who is heading credit at Oraan, but also a comedian, to talk about education and financing around education, especially as a young woman. And welcome, Anusheh. Thank you for being on this podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited about this conversation.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How about yourself?
Good, thanks. So, Anusheh, the topic today is around education and financing that education. And you have a really great story. How did you think about saying कि अच्छा मैं खुद अपनी education finance करूँगी, and what was the reaction of your parents around it?
Yeah, so I think the part of it was definitely कि education एक इतनी important चीज होती है, and to be able to, I came from a background where we were just like an average household, right? So there were a lot of expenses going around, and by the time I was in my undergraduate, my brother was also doing his O levels and A levels, and you know how expensive that is, right? So सब कुछ manage करना, I knew there was obviously stresses around financial management. Parents ने कभी कुछ कहा नहीं, but one of the things I remember very clearly was at one point in time मेरे भाई की O levels की fees due थी, and maybe fees due थी, and I remember my mother had to sell off some of her jewelry to be able to finance that semester. And that stayed very deeply with me because, we know as Pakistanis, a woman's shadi ki jewelry is perhaps, it has a lot of sentimental value. It's used as a safety net. And then also, like, you're never really getting that back. And for a lot of women, maybe that's the only time you've been able to invest in that kind of jewelry, right? And it struck me really hard. And I was just like, ekdam se obviously like inspiration thi ki yaar kuch खुद करना है, कुछ ऐसा भी करना है कि grades भी अच्छे करने हैं और काम भी, पढ़ाई भी करनी है, काम भी करना है, and all of those things. And so what I started doing was back at the time, I think ki online writing jobs and content jobs.
This is before you went to your university or during university?
During university. Okay. So this is undergrad, right? Yeah. So during that, I just decided acha content ki kuch jobs thi, like writing articles on sports. I remember I used to write about golf.
What a boring topic to write about.
Yeah, but like, it's like one of the... this is a very military thing, but one of the things, because I grew up in a military household, one of the sports that we did have access to was golf. So kuch samajh aati thi uski. So I thought like, okay, let me just learn a bit more about that. And I remember उस वक्त मुझे मेरे ख्याल में महीने के 3 articles लिखने के दिन के 15,000 या मिलते थे, right? And I was in NUS, so that was a significant chunk of my semester fees. Monthly basis pay, right? Okay. And I talked to my administration department, got it broken down semester, same monthly basis pay. They cooperated and all of that. So I got very lucky about that. But talking about all of that, it's become so much more difficult also.
Absolutely. But so I remember like during my time, so जब मैं university जा रही थी, उस वक्त my parents had said कि हम आपके 1 साल की एजुकेशन के फीस पे कर सकेंगे, एंड देन वील फिगर इट आउट. इट वाज नेवर कि हम नहीं फिगर आउट कर सकेंगे. दिस वाज आल्सो 2008. सो फाइनेंशियल क्रंच जो पाकिस्तान में फील हुआ था वो 2009-2010 में हुआ था. And I remember उनने पहले 2 साल तो fund करा, but the end of second year, the conversation was like, we can't afford it right now. Please come back. And at that point, I was, in my head, it was, I actually don't have an option to come back. Why is that an option? Why are we not talking about, okay, go figure it out, you're an adult now. So I like, was that, did your parents ever say कि अभी ब्रेक ले लो और फिर वापस से शुरू कर लेंगे, या it was like कि नहीं, go figure it out?
So with undergrad, I think they were actually, even though I knew they were struggling, so there was never a conversation कि मतलब नहीं निकल आओ. I'm blessed that way in a lot of ways. कि उन्होंने कभी भी नहीं कहा था कि नहीं ख़त्म करनी, कुछ भी करके करेंगे. But I remember like when I wanted to go to masters and I wanted to do it abroad because that was one of my dreams, right? Like a milestone and all of that. That conversation was entirely like, it was like, we genuinely can't afford it, so unfortunately you can't go. And us point pe, I just didn't want to take no as that answer, right? And I remember for a couple of years I got into some universities. I kept deferring. सारी accounting करी थी कि सब कुछ बेच बाच दें, मैं इतनी job कर लूँ, because I was working at by that time as well. I save all of my money. I'm going to be able to make it. And it was still, the math just still wasn't adding up. But then when I realized there was a lot of like scholarships, and so I got super super lucky, and I got a Fulbright scholarship for my masters.
That's amazing.
Thanks. I'm really proud of myself. Uske baghair, I know that my masters would never happen.
But that's what you're talking about is something very interesting. And I think I've also started experiencing that now when I speak to a lot more students. जब मैं अपनी फाइनेंसिंग के बारे में सोच रही थी, I went to school in Canada, तो वहाँ पर I had a lot of options available. I could take up financial aid from university, which was not on like absolute. It was on merit basis. Or I could go to a bank and take a loan as a student, an international student as well, and finance my education, which is the route that I took. My brother became the guarantor, और मैं जो थी school fees उस तरीके से मैंने 2 साल गुजारे और खुद फिर काम करके खुद pay back करा उसको. But when I come here and I look at like what are the options available with universities, local universities की जो बात करते हैं, फाइनेंशियल एड या तो सिर्फ और सिर्फ नेसेसिटी और डोनेशन के बेस पे अवेलेबल है, या थोड़ी बहुत स्कॉलरशिप्स हैं, बट देयर इज़ नो अदर ऑप्शन. There's no debt that you can take. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. And you know, this is a topic right close to my heart because this is what I do as a day job, right? Like student financing. And you're spot on, right? The way, so एक ज़माना था जब कुछ फंड्स जो थे वो मेरिट स्कॉलरशिप्स के लिए होते थे और कुछ फाइनेंशियल नीड बेसिस के लिए होते थे. But what I'm hearing when I'm speaking to a lot of these universities, well, कि need इतनी बढ़ गई है कि there's actually scholarships in a lot of these institutions now are just on need basis. Merit-based scholarships don't exist, right? So when we were growing up, for example, हमें फिर भी उम्मीद थी कि like work really hard, get the GPA, and you'll be able to get that. That option is going away. And then also every year the enrollment is going so much up. So where does this funding come from? So a lot of these universities have endowment funds, right? But there's a limit to how much they can raise and what can go, and that's all going towards financial assistance. कर्ज़े हंसना का एक जो donations या charitable या interest free loans की basis पे होता है, they have very rigid financial criteria, right? Like for example, I'll share this story. Like in some of the applications, there's this thing कि आपके घर में अगर 2 ACs हैं तो you don't qualify for the loan.
Wow.
I remember मेरे घर में 2 ACs थे, पर मुझे पता है कि रात को एक AC चलता था और सब एक कमरे में. So there's a lot more. Just having those ACs does not prove कि आपके पास कितने income है. But like a lot of those students get, you know, sort of.
But it's not even about just income capabilities, right? It is about cash flow management. अगर मुझे school fees pay करनी है तो मुझे majority of the universities आपसे lump sum मांगती हैं, and that actually affects your cash flow.
Absolutely.
And these kinds of things are not being taught in school, but also not being talked about.
That's such a big topic and it's so important. It's just generally cash flow management ki I think generally ही बात नहीं होती. People don't realize that your money is not just meant to go towards the lump sum expenses all in one go, right? And student financing in Pakistan has just worked in lump sum. या फिर आपको एक 50% 2 installments मिल जाएंगी या 3 installments मिल जाएंगी, पर उससे ज़्यादा नहीं. But it's really important because you don't have an emergency fund that way. You don't have any room to, you know, sort of invest or grow your money or any of those things. And think about a household जहाँ पे 2 बच्चे like mine, right? Like 2 बच्चे एक एक यूनिवर्सिटी में हैं, you how much money do you need to have to make those money?
Yeah.
But what I've realized is it's also because there has not been that option, there's this fear also, right?
Yeah.
Like कि opportunity loss, अगर मैं balloon payment में नहीं
Yeah.
करूँगा, मेरे पास और कोई option नहीं है, या I'll get dropped out, and education and your degree is going to change the entire future of not only you but your entire household.
Generation as well.
Yeah.
But going back to your personal story, I remember कि जब I was going through like being okay, completely okay with taking up a loan to finance my education and figuring it out. There was a lot of chatter around कि oh how high loan ले ली, पैसे नहीं हैं, but without realizing that it's actually a step towards my own financial independence, because this is something that, yes, my parents obviously supported it, but it's something that I want for myself as well, from an education perspective and an experience perspective as well, right? Did you face that high from like peers who knew that आपने loan ली है या assistance के लिए apply करा हुआ है?
Absolutely, I think, and it's so crazy, right? Because this is also when the time I was growing up, लोग अपने microwaves definitely installments में लेते थे और
Yeah.
loan के तौर पे लेते थे, right? Like, or like a steam press or these kinds of things. But and these are consumption goods. What value are they? Quality of
based
life, but
नहीं है, हाँ.
utility based नहीं. What value are they adding to your future?
Yeah.
पर वहाँ पे हम एक्स्ट्रा लाइक so what is the problem that becomes here? एक तो ये था कि like पता नहीं है कैसे वर्क करता है, so it's going to become a problem. But then also like कि नहीं, लोन्स के साथ या कुछ उसके साथ एक्स्ट्रा पैसे देने पड़ेंगे. But this is actually a great return on investment.
Yeah. And
So-
there's so many Sharia compliant products available
There's
as well.
so many Sharia compliance products available. There are ways to make this work for you, and it actually is much better. आपका अभी आज भी सवर जाता है, like for lack of better way of saying it, but आज भी बेहतर होता है और future भी बेहतर होता है, right? For me, it's like, because it was not particularly loans, but it was like trying to work at that time. I heard a lot of वो कि मतलब है, मतलब ये किस तरह लड़की काम कर रही है, क्योंकि इंडिपेंडेंस फाइनेंसेस की वो नहीं होती है. In a lot of other people, like it's like loans नहीं लेने इंस्टीट्यूशन से, फ्रेंड्स एंड फैमिली, और मतलब चाचा से मांग लो और वो कर लो और ये कर लो. एंड आई हैव सीन रिश्तेदारियां go really bad by about it, right?
Absolutely. And you touch upon like working through universities, right? Like now it is majority of the people will be working through universities, but when I was going through university, I remember कि मैंने अपनी घर में नहीं बताया था कि मैं 3 jobs करती थी, और मैं 3 बहुत इंटरेस्टिंग किस्म की जॉब्स करती थी. कॉफ़ी शॉप पे भी काम करती थी, फ्रंट डेस्क पे भी काम करती थी, और एक रिसर्च असिस्टेंट के तौर पे भी काम करती थी. बट आई वॉज नेवर कंफर्टेबल इन टेलिंग दैट आई हैव सो मैनी जॉब्स सो दैट आई कैन मैनेज माई डे टू डे एंड नॉट पुट एनी बर्डन ऑन माई पेरेंट्स फॉर बट दैट now I joke about it, and I talk very openly about it, but उस वक्त पे इतना ज़्यादा controversial topic था कि कैसे एक लड़की, एक तो आपने उसको एजुकेशन के लिए बाहर भेजा हुआ है. एंड I'll tell you something really funny, like my mother had to tell ख़ानदान वाले कि वो अपने भाई के साथ रहती है. जब मेरा भाई और मैं दो बिल्कुल सेपरेट सिटीज़ में होते थे, बट बिकॉज ऑफ द माइंड सेट ऑफ पीपल कि एक तो बेटी बाहर गई और फिर बेटी काम भी कर रही है और पढ़ाई भी कर रही है और फिर वो पढ़ाई भी खुद फंड कर रही है, like there was so much taboo around it. Did you feel that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's taboo around it because and this is such an interesting thing, because I think हमारे parents, we've just been programmed in a way like parents provide and they are supposed to provide for a certain point in time, and if they're failing to do so, then मतलब एक stigma है उसके लिए, like आपकी यही job है बस, right? Like, but what we don't realize is that what that does is like it actually creates in a lot of our youth, like when I was growing up at least, क्योंकि ये नहीं होता था, it creates a lot of codependency and it creates a lot of bad money management.
100%.
You need to learn how to manage money much earlier in life, and
Yeah,
I
yeah.
to feel like, you know, your legs are kind of
Yeah,
clipped from
yeah,
under you because you never had that knowledge. और हम छुपाते थे, stress feel हो रहा है, मुझे पता चल रहा है पर कोई बात नहीं हो रही इसके
yeah,
बारे में openly, right? Like how do we manage this
yeah.
as, and then as a woman वो even more हो जाता है कि लड़कियों की तो बिल्कुल ही responsibility
Yeah.
करनी है, right? And it's just like I remember like similarly I hadn't told people that I actually had flatmates
Yeah.
because वो एक पूरा वो conversation कौन है किसके साथ क्या हो रहा है, and it's just such a taboo. I think it parents feel unfortunately कि जैसे
उनके
inadequacy
ऊपर
के
yeah,
उनके
उनके
ऊपर आ
ऊपर
रहे हैं,
pressure
it's
आ रहा है.
it's reflecting badly on them, but I think the conversation really needs to change.
And I think it needs to change. It starts with having those open conversations in the household to be able to say कि नहीं manage कर सकते, and that's completely fine. Figure out a way if you are passionate about it or if you can figure out. And I think जब आप वो थोड़ा सा push back देते हो, um, students or kids are smart enough to be like, you know what, we will figure it out. हम अपना system, we in Pakistan need to start also thinking about, right, कि किस तरीके से आपकी financial identity बन सकती है, whether you are a man or a woman, and how does that impact you for your future upward mobility.
Absolutely.
So Ivali, these are very, very important conversations, and these are very important points that we need to start pushing out, and people need to start actively learning about कि उनके पास options क्या available हैं, whether it is from education perspective to then going on to buy their own cars to then going on to buy their own houses, and creating that environment and network where people can openly talk about and ask these questions without feeling कि oh, मैं इस तरह के बात में I'll feel shy or people will judge me for asking these kinds of questions.
Absolutely, and I think that's one of the things we're really trying to address, right? That we're building that community where these kinds of questions in student financing and building your financial identity as a student,
Yeah.
you know, starts becoming a conversation, right? So the Study Now, Pay Later program that we have, what it essentially does is, even if you're paying partial or not, you know, the entirety of your fees yourself, or if somebody else is even responsible for them, it's making that conversation accessible to you as a student.
Yeah.
To realize कि आपकी option ये है कि मैं अपनी university fees, like I can apply for this program, get my university fees paid directly, and then pay back in easy monthly installments.
And share the burden with your parents.
Share the burden with your family.
Yeah.
Help your family manage the household financing a lot more,
Yeah.
and create, especially in this economy, make sure that there is emergency runway and funds
100%.
available.
100%. This conversation has been really, really great. I think we both have some really great journeys to talk about how when we had a will, we found a way to support ourselves. And I think that also comes with just parents being okay with it, like families being कि हाँ ठीक है, अगर pushing us in or making us come out of our comfort zones, to then be able to say कि हाँ figure out हो सकता है. So this is I mean, this one message that I would like to give, and I like to hear your side as well, that if there is a will, there is always a way.
Absolutely. I think like my number one message would just be that do your homework, knock down on every door possible, and figure out, like, talk to your student aid, financial aid offices, admin offices, do your research out there. There are resources available. And really I think, become aaj se hi, even if you are not the primary person, you know, like a lot of us think, oh, ये parents की problem है तो मैं नहीं इस बारे में सोचता, I'll just focus on the grades, या मैं नहीं इस बारे में सोचती. But आप अगर आज सोचती हैं इस बारे में, it'll actually help make sure your future is much more secure, right?
100%. Thank you so much for having this conversation, Anushya. I think it's a very important conversation, and we would like to continue having these conversations. If you liked this conversation with Anushya around education financing and would love to learn a lot more around it, happy to have her back and talk in detail about the options that we spoke about. Thank you so much for joining us today.